We are going to be speaking about centering communities, a partnership-based approach. So my name is Zoe McKenzie, and I proudly serve as the Senior Manager of Philanthropic Investment and Growth at CECP. And I would like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. So first we have AJ Jordan from Vanguard. He's the head of community and stewardship and president of Vanguard Group. And then we have Reverend Luis Cortes, and he is the founder and CEO of Esperanza. We have, this is not in order here, but here we go, Gwyneth. We have Gwyneth Gaul, who is Comcast NBC Vice President and Strategic Partnerships. We have Caitlin Brazila, who is Pre-Scholars, and we have Lynette Bell from Truist, who is the president of the foundation. And last but definitely not least, we have Joe Scantlebury from Living Cities, and he's the president and CEO. If we could give them all a hand. So I want to share why we're here in this space today. We are going to be working on the title that we have here and really speaking about what it takes to be a trust-based community and corporate partnership. So we're going to first define and explore the concepts of trust-based collaboration and community-centeredness in the context of corporate and nonprofit partnerships. We're going to identify the essential elements that constitute that successful partnership, and we're going to share best practices. So now in this space, I am actually going to share some questions with each of our pair partners. And after that session, we're going to have a breakout session and discuss the work that they've been doing. We have case studies for each of them. So the great thing is that you all are going to get to ask questions of them, of the challenges, which we love to hear about, and of course the successes. So I'm going to start with some questions for the folks, and I'm going to take a seat. Okay, so our first question is for AJ and Luis. We're going to go to the pairs. Luis, is can each of you give an overview of your partnership? So we'd love to hear from each of the organizations and just take your time doing that.
Great, thanks, Zoe. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Great to be with you. So AJ Jordan with the Vanguard Group Foundation. I want to yield the majority of our time around the partnership to my good friend Luis to talk about just really the organization.
This is how we're going to start.
Well, after some travel issues too coming down. But let me first just say how great it is to have this conversation with you, but particularly with our nonprofit partners, because I think far too often, as social impact leaders, we have this conversation amongst each other around partnerships. It's really about how we support and strengthen local communities. So we want to, particularly for this panel, I wanted to make sure that we heard from the voice of community partners and nonprofit leaders. So again, I want to give a lot of time and space to my good friend, Reverend Cortes. But what I'll say from a Vanguard perspective is one of the key elements we know for any relationship, particularly if we'll talk about a place-based partnership we've developed between Vanguard and Esperanza, is trust. And that saying that you talk about, that change happens at the speed of trust. And one of the things that's been, I think, the hallmark of our partnership is that we've taken the time, right? We didn't kind of go in and say we're going to go and start with a day of service and feel like we changed the world. And although we did, did some great volunteerism, we'll talk about some of the pros and cons and how that's worked. But we've really created what I call an impact multiplier effect, where we've layered in philanthropy long-term. If you know anything about Vanguard, if you invest with us, I have a 401k 529, we're about long-term investment, and we take that similar approach in investing in local communities. So we've layered this partnership over time with philanthropy, with board leadership, with thought leadership, with expertise to drive impact over time to build that trust. But I think the key takeaway for today for our conversation is that everything we've done at Vanguard, from our perspective, has been through the lens of what's in the best interest of the people that are served by Esperanza, right? We didn't come in with our own agenda. Certainly we have a focus around early childhood education as a large driver, but the how we did it and where we focused the project is really driven by what we heard on the ground, both from the Rev, but also from the residents that he serves. And so again, that's the lens by which we make decisions, and that's really I think the foundation of our partnership. So I'll stop there and love for you to talk about Esperanza and the great work we're doing.
I need notes because I'm a reverend. And if I just start talking, then I'll stand up and I start doing other stuff, and it would be totally inappropriate for this meeting. So I'm gonna, I'll have to start dancing this. So I want to start by saying Esperanza is in North Philadelphia in the Hunting Park community. We have 3 strategic corporate sponsors, and I'm under a lot of pressure because I don't know how, but all 3 of them ended up on this dais. So no, don't clap. It's really stressful. It's like I came with one of them, but then the other ones, I didn't come with the other ones. But anyway, North Philadelphia, Hunting Park is 85% Latino or Latin, as the new word is, because it was Latino for a while, and then it was Latinx, and now we're using Latin with an E at the end, which means we get to name ourselves as opposed to being named by others. It's 14% African American, our community. The city of Philadelphia is the poorest of the top 10 cities in the country, and I'm talking about economics only, not in culture. But it is economically disadvantaged city, and the neighborhood we're in is the most economically disadvantaged. Our relationship with Vanguard did not start with the corporation. It started with an individual who worked at the corporation. We were looking for a Latin person who was a governance attorney, and the Vanguard Corporation happens to have a Latina who is their governance attorney. So as an organization, when we were looking, we kept looking around. They told us there's this woman that is doing that job. So we had mutual friends introduce us, and what we found was that we both were looking for each other, that the individual employee joined us not because of the company, but because of her mission. So that's a different play, right? But after 2 years of service, she came, she's trusted, everyone knows her, she's part of the board, part of the executive committee as she's the secretary of the board. She comes and says to us, hey, there's an opportunity to do work in early childhood, and you guys have a college that teaches early childhood. That began about a 1.5-year process, where we had meetings in the community, we had meetings with the daycare centers in our neighborhood, most of which are unlicensed, most of which there's a long list. And if any of you do daycare work, if you know that work, we resemble all the bad things about doing neighborhood daycare, though it is a very important job. And it is the only one, what we have is all that people could afford. So at the end, unregulated, unqualified sites, untrained staff, and not fiscally viable institutions. We put together a program, and as we go along, I'll share a little bit more about what were the important things of that program and what were the learnings of it.
Thank you so much. Caitlin and Gwyneth.
Oh, okay, so are we supposed to have slides representing the partnership behind this? Just to make sure, because they have a very pretty slide. There's Esperanza. It's glorious. So I'm Gwyneth. I have the great pleasure of leading Philanthropy at Comcast, NBCUniversal. Took the role about 4.5 years ago and came in at an interesting time where we were really thinking about reshaping, reframing our strategy, developing a new portfolio. What were we kind of uniquely positioned to invest in communities, and how could we do that at scale? That was December of 2019, and we all know how kind of the events of 2020 unfolded. And so we started to kind of put together a straw man framework. I thought I was going to have a year to study my belly button and learn and develop this strategy, and that we just did not have that luxury. And so it became really important as we were kind of meeting the moments and the speed and the intensity of everything that was happening at that time to identify partners that could kind of join us along the way and be there with us together. And so started that strategy. We have a commitment to advance digital equity. It's Project Up. We invest in 3 main pillars. And as we started that strategy, which was then followed by our $100 million commitment to racial equity and social justice, we started to bring Perscolis alongside of that journey. And so I think one of the things that has been really unique and special about the relationship and partnership with Perscolis is its kind of breadth and the scale that it allows a company like a Comcast, NBC, to be able to reach across markets all across the country, but also go very deep in those communities as well in a way that we never could as a corporate entity. And so to really kind of have that organization, to be able to have that scale, the depth, and maintain the quality is unique. And I think we've invested a lot of time in cultivation and the partnership and the relationship that has amounted in a lot of these amazing numbers behind us. And I, in some ways, feel like we're kind of just getting started, which is great. We're a media and technology company, and so when we think about how we invest in partners, we think well beyond the dollar. We will never be the biggest dollar in the room, but we have incredible people and platforms and other tools at our disposal that we really try to bring to bear on the partnership. And I think we've done that in a meaningful way with Perscolis. We've also done that with Esperanza as well, and look forward to more. So I will defer to Caitlin on the remaining portion.
Sure. Thank you, Gwyneth. I'm Caitlin Brazil. I'm from Perscolis, and maybe I'll just start by giving a little context for who we are and what we do. So Perscolis exists really because of 3 key gaps that we see in the marketplace. The first one is the opportunity gap, that across the country today, there are about 50 million Americans who are working full-time and who are not earning enough to actually support their families. And we think that's a problem. The next gap is actually a talent gap that we can see as we look across US firms, that they cannot grow at the rate that they want to, specifically because of a lack of technology talent. And we know that higher ed today actually can't meet that need. So if you look across all of the comp sci programs in the country, they're graduating about 1/3 of the number of entry-level roles that exist today. So there are opportunities to have one problem, solve the other problem. The final gap is a diversity gap. And this area, not the tech sector, but tech roles specifically, which cut across tons of industries, is one where Black, Latin, Native Americans are dramatically underrepresented today, where women are dramatically underrepresented today. And we estimate that it would take hiring about 500,000 underrepresented individuals to make the tech workforce reflect the communities that they serve. And so we're on a mission to do that. No big deal, we got it. When we met Gwyneth, back in the day, back in the 2020 era, we were an organization that had been around, had developed an immersive model of tuition-free education, had been working already with about 800 different companies to provide talent to meet those technology needs, and already had a model that successfully proved that we could help people 3x their income from before Perscolis to after Perscolis. But we were also in a place where we had also looked during the pandemic and said, actually, the strategic plan that we're marching towards, not good enough. We recognize that we need to grow faster, that we need to put all of the tools at our disposal to ensure that our learners not only can get that first job in tech, but can really build careers that give them the assets and wealth that they'll need to weather these kinds of emergencies that we had never anticipated. And so we were actively looking for partners that could help us, not just with the financial capital, but help us in terms of expertise in understanding the telecom sector and their technology needs, help us in terms of providing volunteers and connecting with our local markets. And so over the course of the last 3 years, Comcast has helped us launch in 7 additional cities, has become a key partner in 16 total markets, and has helped us actually embed in communities while being a national organization. So we can talk more about that as we go.
Excellent, thank you. Lynette?
Good morning, can you hear me? Great. I'm Lynette Bell, president of the Truist Foundation. The word Truist might not be known to everybody, so 4 years ago, 2 Southeastern banks, SunTrust Bank and BB&T, merged to form Truist Financial Corp. We're the 7th largest financial institution with over $500 billion in assets in the country with 50,000 employees. The Truist Foundation, which I get to lead, is the philanthropic arm of the bank, and as such, you know, we started out 4 years ago, and I will say this is our 4th year and 4th birthday, but we started out 4 years ago really looking at how can we make a difference using evidence-based data to drive our grant-making platform, but also our strategic investments. And so we started the Truist Foundation in that specific space. And what we learned from the data is that we were providing support to tons of organizations separately before the merger, to organizations around. And I lovingly call it, we were scattering seeds, you know, planting flowers everywhere, but not having a real concentrated impact. And so we went through this progress and process with our board of directors to change the direction of the Truist Foundation. And so we have 2 strategic pillars that we work on today. This is a 5-year strategic plan. The first one is building career pathways to economic mobility. That really is about helping individuals, as Caitlin talked about, upskill and reskill for the new high demand jobs. You know, the gaps that exist today in the workforce in different sectors has to be fulfilled with the help not only of private corporations, but also with nonprofits. And so we thought that is a great way to help individuals do that. And we moved away from K through 12 because we were supporting K through 12 before that. And so we moved away from that because we have other opportunities in the company to support, you know, cradle to grave, but we really wanted to be strategic and drive a concentrated impact. And so we started out on this vision of doing this. The second pillar, based on the data that we were getting, you know, post-pandemic, was that small businesses were the DNA of this country. They're the strong fabric of our country, and that when the pandemic happened, 65% of small businesses were not resilient to rebound from that. Many of them had to recalibrate their model from B2B to something else, back function or back room. And during that time period, there's a lot of learnings that happen. And so we know that there's a lot in the ecosystem for small businesses. And so those are our 2 strategic pillars. And one of the things that occurred after the first year of establishing this strategy 4 years ago is like, we wanted to really strengthen those pillars and talk about building an initiative that drives change. And we started with the question, where does change begin? Because we really understand, as everybody said here today, that boots on the ground is where you make that impactful difference. And so we started the Where It Starts initiative. And so we went through 5 cities that had the same demographic threads, I would say. High poverty, high unemployment, not a trained workforce, adult workforce to take on the new high demand jobs, and then small businesses not being resilient if there's another economic disruption. The great news is that we found and looked for, because we're a bank, you know, we're not swooping in going, we got the answer. We were like, who's on the ground who can help us drive this change? And so we found 3 national nonprofits who had never worked together. And we brought them together as part of our design solution and saying, help us solve what the data is telling us is an issue. And so the great news is that we committed $22 million with 3 nonprofits. The first one being Main Street America, Gaul, and then Living Cities, which Joe, who's my partner here today, is going to talk about Living Cities. But each of those nonprofit partners was doing this work around these 2 strategic pillars. And they were making a difference. And the difference is that the differentiator was that they were going in, working with those organizations that were already on the ground, but had the ability to help drive scale and capacity for them to do more. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Joe.
Thank you. Big build up there. Good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Scantlebury, the CEO of Living Cities, and we are a national intermediary working in about 23, soon to be 30 cities. But we work with a vision in mind. We're a member collaborative of financial institutions and foundations, strange bedfellows, right? Very different organizations corporations are welcome, but all of them are coming together to do something more than just aggregate money for sub-granting. They're all at this table because they actually share our vision, and that is that in every American city, people should be able to live economically sustainable lives, should be able to achieve some level of abundance, should be able to stay connected, and have an aspiration to thrive. That's a simple thing. But for all of the work I know many of you do and many of us do, that's a very hard thing. So strategically, what we actually have decided is that we wanted to lean into one of the root causes of what we've all now called the racial income and wealth gap that we see in America. And our intention is that we believe that there are more Americans than not who want to eliminate the color line in communities. That we want to walk in and not be able to figure out where the hood is, just from the smell and the sight of where the liquor stores are. We want to be able to see it differently and do it differently. And so where does this come in? Truist Foundation invites us to be part of where it starts. I was about to say where it's at, but I'm like, I was about to say where it's at, but I was like, no, that's too New York. That's too New York. But they invite us to be part of this, and they invite us to be part of this because one of the things that we pride ourselves in doing is to bring together the conversation with local partners, government, philanthropy, and the investment community, and having the kind of conversations that we're all at the same table together. So I love having Esperanza and Perscolas here, because if you think about what Rev said, just describing the daycare centers, necessary providers. But if tomorrow they went for capital to build a NACI accredited early childhood center, they'd have a hard time getting that money. If Perscolas' graduates said, hey, we're knocking it out, we've grown from the South Bronx, 16 other cities, we're knocking it out, we're doing it. But if we went for the capital, any of those individual graduates went for the capital to build their own sustainable businesses, they'd have a hard time. And so the opportunity that Truist has laid forward with our partners is how do we organize? How do we actually bring government to the table? How do we identify those commercial corridors that have been neglected and set aside? And how do we get capital to show up in a way that's both responsive, responsible, sustainable, and durable? So I'll stop talking because I can go on. So,
Thank you for that, Joe, and thank you, Lynette. And now that we have an overview, we'd like to get an understanding of where was the work, how does the work, and who does the work in these relationships. So the next question is going to be for Gwyneth and Caitlin, and it's going to be, what strategies have proven most effective in fostering these community-based and trust-based relationships?
Sure. Why not? Yeah. Caitlin does all the work. No, I mean, I think for us at least, when we think about partnership, like we really think about a two-way relationship here. This is so much more than like beyond a grant, beyond dollars. That is the start of the relationship for us. But I think, especially as we think about our partnership with Perscolas, really thinking about how we align on a shared vision, right? Something that is actually going to advance both of the objectives. We are both deeply committed to advancing economic mobility for underrepresented populations. They are uniquely positioned to do that and do that work exceedingly well. And so it is, I believe, incumbent on us as funders to trust the partners to actually do the work that they are setting out to do. And I think, you know, what has set us up for success, and I think continues to, is again, kind of aligning on that shared framework at the outset, but really kind of handing over the reins and letting them do the work. We check in periodically. We're always in touch on things. We brainstorm on, hey, what about this crazy idea, or what about that crazy idea? She can tell me that's a dumb idea, and that works out really well as well. But I think, again, that kind of shared vision and then really trusting the partner to do the work is what has, I think, made this partnership and many of our partnerships successful, but would really welcome Caitlin's input on that.
Don't worry, Gwyneth, you don't have any dumb ideas. You know, I think one of there's a few things that are pretty unique about this partnership, and certainly, you know, our shared values and commitment were critical off the bat, right? So we're both advancing racial equity. We're both seeing technology as having true potential to create economic mobility, but also recognizing the potential to exacerbate inequality, right? And so this digital equity focus is something that brought us together. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about, you know, two national organizations that have really strong community roots is that we had to create partnerships that allow for not just like Gwyneth and Caitlin to know what's happening, right? But for tons of people who are in communities to actually collaborate and work together. And so that was a really intentional effort, and that took some work early on in our partnership. And I think understanding both like how each of our organizations operated, you know, I can't even tell you like how patient Gwyneth was with my like, what do you mean central wait, what's Comcast cable? How's that different than the other? You know, just understanding the business is a thing in itself, and I think has helped us to really understand what are all the assets that we can take advantage of. You know, I think one of the things that is really, really strong about our partnership is that once we agreed on these are the goals that we're getting towards, these are the outcomes that we'll know if this is working, most of our time and energy is spent on Gwyneth coming to me saying like, how do we help you today, right? What are the things that or is it volunteers? Is it events? Is it, you know, amplifying your work through PSAs, right? This kind of assets that Comcast, NBCUniversal has is not something that Perscolas can tap in any other way. And so I think that's just a really great frame and a good setup for a partnership.
I think just one thing I would add, I mean, I think right as a corporate funder, we are in a unique position where we have business assets to bring to the table. We also have an obligation to align the work to advance business objectives as well. And if we can do that and do that really well, there can be some incredible impact that happens. And so I think when Caitlin talked about just the relationships beyond us, really making sure there's stickiness across the business. And so whether that was across all these different 16 markets and making sure those local leaders in each of those markets knew the local Perscolas team, that all of our HR leaders were aware of Perscolas and they were informing the training, but like getting that stickiness across the business so that it's not just me that's saying Perscolas is amazing and they're doing incredible impact for work, but it is our local leaders in Detroit. It is our HR leader that is running our tech platform that can also, sorry, there's a bug, that can also speak to that, and then that helps to continue the sustainability of the partnership. It allows me to go deeper when we're looking to scope our next partnership and what that's going to look like from a budget perspective. It's easier to make that case. And so I think, again, that stickiness and aligned values, but also business objectives really has made this, I think, successful to date.
Thank you for that and sharing about the openness and communication, which really transitions perfectly to the next question that I have for Lynette and Joe. That's about transparency. Transparency is often cited as the key element of building trust between corporate funders and nonprofit partners. Can you share some initiatives that you have fostered to build transparency in your partnerships? We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I would like to know how many funders are in the room, corporate funders? Oh, most of everybody, okay. How many nonprofits in the room? All right, I'm just gonna, all right, get the lone soldier, okay. I'm talking to funders then. I will say, you want to stand and tell everybody your name? I will say one of the things when you talk about building transparency when you are trying to form a partnership, you know, we came to these nonprofits with, you know, as we frame what we thought was the problem in these select cities. And so the other piece of this that I didn't talk about earlier is that we realized for the design solution to work, it takes everybody at the table. And so the 5 cities we picked that had the highest levels of poverty, unemployment were Atlanta, Miami, Charlotte, Nashville, and Memphis. And so all of those mayors came together as part of this initiative that when we provided the $22 million, they were like, we're going to bring the public sector piece of it together as well. But we had to activate that as a partner in some of those cities, because even though the nonprofit has the scale and ability to drive, they did not have that connectivity to, so we actually activated and got those mayors on board because they have federal dollars, quite frankly, that they're supposed to be dispersing in their communities, but you still have the same statistical issues. And so you got to figure out who takes on the ownership or responsibility for a failed community. And so part of the key performance indicators that we have as funders is like, these are our metrics and we want to meet you with you on these, but we were very transparent about where we wanted to go for a North Star, what were we trying to do, and realizing that this play was not a short play. That's a piece with funders. If you think about it, when you think about your corporations and your ROI, when you talk about philanthropy, and again, philanthropy fuels the marketplace for ideas, right? But we still are accountable to a company that is looking for either a return on this investment or in order for me to continue to fund the foundation or whatever the philanthropic arm, I need to see return. I need to see KPIs. I need to see impact. New word now is impact investing. So we talked about what we needed to see as a funder to support it, understanding that the underbelly of the work was addressing issues that were part of a failed community. And so when we brought the three nonprofits together, quite frankly, they had never worked together. They had not even met each other. So we create that synergy, like, let's talk about who you each are. We've already provided the dollars to support the initiative. So you don't have to worry about figuring out who's going to get what piece of the pie. The pie is already here. Pull your knife and fork up to the table and take a bite. But put aside your differences about that and really think about what are the assets those nonprofits bring to the table that will help us drive to meet the solutions on that local level.
And I'll add that when you talk about trust and transparency, how do you actually position yourself? Now that I know there's predominantly funders in the room, how do you position yourself so that you're no longer the person who's just asking for grant reports, the person who's celebrating the announcement of the grant, versus the person I can trust and say, hey, I'm having a problem. I see some stuff going on here that we haven't addressed. We might need new partners. We might need a different emphasis in this city. We might need a different voice. Not asking you to do anything more than you've already done, but who can you connect us to? Who else should we bring to this conversation? Because my job in my role is to push, right? To say some of the things that the financial institution should not be saying, right? Because it may clang against other interests in the bank, but need to be said at that community level, need to be said at that civic level. When you have cities that have abandoned whole corridors, or more importantly, have vast federal dollars coming in, but don't have the capacity to utilize those dollars well, that's a problem. That's a sustainability issue, that's a civic issue, that's a leadership issue, and they need trusted partners to be able to have those conversations. We feel empowered to do that. We feel empowered to do that. More importantly, because our members, and in this case, Lynette is one of our board members, right? And all of our members sit on the common board together. We're able to share different ideas from different investors in the work. And we're able to leverage the knowledge capital, and the social capital to actually bring people together who've never come together before, just as they did with this partnership, bringing MSA, Kale, and Living Cities together.
And the last thing I'll add, which Joe is so nice in not saying, so out of those 5 cities, so as you think about it from a funder's perspective, this is a project, we know it's going to be long term, but every city should be at this point as you look at your timeline and what KPIs I'm working with. And right now there's a single city, and I'm not going to call the city, but we're having quite some difficulty. And again, I talked about the demographic threads. They have the same demographic threads, and again, every place is different, but when you look at why there is a failed system in the city and people are not getting the access to capital, and this city has a huge logistics hub and is still not able to move forward, then Joe comes back to me and everyone who's nonprofits like, this is not working. We need to regroup and recalibrate. And I'm okay as a funder for them to tell me that versus, oh, we didn't spend your money right at the end of the period or time, and then you surprise me. But along the way, when there's some hiccups, then they have the trust, and I have the trust with them that they can notify me.
Thank you for that, Lynette. We are going to bring it back to AJ and Louise with a question about community-centered approaches. So can you provide some specific examples of how your partnerships have prioritized the voices of community, the needs of communities, and how you incorporate feedback and input from community members? Thank you.
Great question. Maybe we can go back to the partnership slide as well. We can share some examples. So as you mentioned at the outset, everything we've done in this partnership, which is pretty unique, has really come through the voices of Esperanza, of the leaders that they serve in the community. Again, we talked about the board member that we have on there and making sure that we had someone, not just a senior leader, but a Latina who had a similar lived experience as the population. That was very intentional. The work with the child care centers, again, we have a focus around early childhood, but the how, and again, having that be focused on professional development was really driven by community residents and entrepreneurs who ran the centers. Another thing too around our volunteerism, and this was really interesting, we wanted to introduce, this is probably like now going like year 2 or 3 of the partnership. We said we need to do something really big to bring Vanguard in the community, to understand the community better, to deepen the relationship. And so we were launching these global days of impact, right, like a lot of us do. But Philly is our headquarters market. And so we had this big event planned, and we had our CEO coming, and all so it was kind of high profile. And the easiest thing to do, right, would have been to come transcend into one location, and they have a great, beautiful campus. And that was initially how we were thinking about it. And then, of course, we went to the residents, and they said, well, if that's what Vanguard wants to do, that worked for Vanguard. It doesn't work for us. And they had a laundry list of about...
By the way, that's a very stressful moment for us.
But I think it's important, because when you center yourself in terms of, and the values is based on what the residents want, then the decision is actually pretty easy. So the residents said, we have a long list of stuff that we wanted to do, projects we haven't had the funding for. Some are 50-person projects, some are like 5-person projects. And by the way, they're scattered across this geographic footprint that you see up here. And so we had a decision to make. We can do something that, again, would have been real easy, and you bring
come to the park,
and
do the park,
and it's and this is, again, for us as a company, this is our first kind of coming out party for these type of events. It was going to set the tone for a lot of other things we're doing globally. But we made the right decision, of course, because we're centered in community. And ended up, again, we had a bunch of buses and driving people around, but it really sent a message in terms of trust building to the community that we cared enough to listen and respond to their needs. And what you see, and it actually ended up being a better project. So one of the ideas was, this picture up here was one of the communities, the early childhood centers that we funded through our philanthropic work, right? So we went to some of these centers and worked there. But the other thing I'd say too, even in terms of I remember the closing ceremony, sometimes it's the small things in building trust and centering community. We were going to do, we had community residents and folks from Esperanza and some of our leaders, one of those big oversized check presentations that we all do. And we've invested $2 million in this partnership. And so we say, we could do that, but it's kind of like, using the community as a prop in some ways. How would the community feel? Instead, we had one of the first folks who, she's pictured up here with that photograph, who was an entrepreneur who ran one of the early learning centers, who gave her testimonial, and unbeknownst to her, we identified a local person to curate a photograph, a portrait of her from the neighborhood, and we presented it to her, and it was very emotional, and it built a kind of emotional connection between some of our leaders, the community residents. But I said all that to say, again, everything we've done has been through, again, leading from community first, centering in community, and making sure that the work we're doing, again, is through the voices of those who have the closest proximity to the work, and investments in the local neighborhoods.
So AJ calls me, and I need to say AJ and I have a relationship from his previous work. So we've known each other maybe 15, 20 years. So AJ calls me and says, hey, I'm so excited. Vanguard wants to come out to the hood. And I'm like, I could think of 1,000 things that will go wrong if we don't do this right. And so he says, what do you think? And I said, let me talk to the team. And when I bring it to the team, they're like, how many people? And it was a lot. What was it, 200 something? And so I call AJ back, and I'm like, AJ, I was thinking. He goes, Luis, just tell me. He knows me well enough that he heard it but see, that's relationship. He heard it because you never want to tell a major funder. You heard the number. You don't want to tell a major funder bad news. And this is AJ's job, like it's your job. And he's responding to his CEO. And I'm like, well, and then when I told him, what if, think about this. We're going to be all over the whole hood. Now, there's, if you know North Philly, there's violence. There's a lot of things going on in our neighborhoods right now. And I'm like, but we need daycare centers fixed. We need all these things. We sat down and we talked to the neighborhood and we have a list. They took on the logistics of that because we couldn't. We could tell them, here's a site. It's a daycare center. They need a place for the kids to play. Here's another site that needs paint. Here's another. So we went painting. So we had a list, a large list. I don't know, I think it was 16, something like 16 sites. Now, AJ tells me, our CEO is coming. And I'm like, oh God, no. Our CEO is coming. Now, here's what I want to say, because it was brought to my attention. The CEO of Vanguard comes. We expected the check, and he gets back in the car and rolls. He showed up early. He stayed the entire day. He went to 3 sites and worked. I lost track of him after the first 5 minutes. But my team, after the whole thing is over, my team has to get together to tell me anything bad that happened. That's right? So we sit down, and they're like, their CEO was busting his ass. And I was like, what? Because since I lost track of him, I assumed he went home. But he did it. He raked in the park. I know they gave me a report one by one what he did. It was one of the most impactful things in this relationship. Because the neighborhood people noticed it and they didn't believe it when he was told, that guy over there poorly painting he was painting in the park a seat, a bench. But he was at it. He was going at it. And he did a couple of, he covered up. So he did, it was more than one. He had to put a few coats. But he was serious about it, and it made a difference. So some of the things I was told to share are, always pick the field, but please don't pick the thing. Let the communities pick the thing. That's what's been, with the 3 companies up here, we've been lucky or blessed. I'm clergy. They've picked the field. This is what we need to do. We're in tech. We're in finance. But they let us pick the thing. And that makes all the difference in the world. Time and patience, because when we got this project started, it was a discussion about $750,000. And we were supposed to answer in 6 months. We answered in a year and a half. And the investment has been tremendously good. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on us, because when someone says to you, when you say to a potential fundee, you got 6 months, and they come back and they are place-based and they're in an economically disadvantaged community, it puts a tremendous amount of stress on us not losing that opportunity. But we had enough of a relationship with Vanguard to say, we're going to need more time. And they funded other groups, but they held down with us. Larger funding makes greater impact. It's not as sexy for the corporation, right? Because and we get it, because when we're a national intermediary, and we get government grants, and we do grants around the country, and it's always the stress of, do you do one $250,000 grant or 10 $25,000 grants, right? But if it's really about impact, which is the pressure we get from the neighborhood side, it's sort of like, we want to give you $10,000 and we need $800,000 in impact. And so that's an issue. Too small a grant, we've learned to say no to. Because a lot of corporations, none of that are in here, but a lot of corporations will ask to give you $10,000 and they want $50,000 in return. And that's kind of like natural in the beginning. Small groups always say yes, and then they're going to fail. We've also learned to say no to if it's not our focus. We're an education and economic development organization. We do not do social service. And a real investment of time, talent, and treasure from the corporation. Time is actually harder to get sometimes than treasure, right? Because everybody has a job and you have to meet. But the time, the talent, and the treasure, and talent is one that we still don't know how to mine, right? And so nonprofit groups still don't know necessarily how do you, and so you folks are the interlocutors between us and a corporation. So for example, I'll pick on another company here, not the one I came with, but it's a tech company. I have no clue what to do with AI, but I know I got to do something. So we're having a conversation with Comcast. And so, though I should have it with you guys with finance, but that's another story. Anyway, last but not least, find the successful organizations in neighborhoods, in place, and try to find a way to work with them. They've been there. They're doing the work. And sometimes a little push will actually get you a larger return.
Thank you for that. And we do want to make sure that we leave enough time for the workshop portion. So we are going to actually get started now. Each of you at your tables, you should see a case study that is there. It will be a case study that represents one of these organizations up here. So what we are going to do now is going to break for that, for you to engage in the case study and then be able to ask questions.